anything unusual? And they said no, but just subconsciously they apparently smelled it, because the people in this room with the fart spray made less morally generous judgments than the people in the room without the fart spray. So again, something totally irrelevant, and fart spray is affecting our moral intuitions and our moral judgments. A fourth one. I can actually change your moral judgments by pointing a magnet at a part of your brain just behind and above your right ear called the RTPJ, the right temporal parietal junction. This is that's called the transcranial magnetic stimulator. Vian Young at MIT did this recently. Basically what happens is that you disrupt this tiny little centimeter-wide part of the brain back here, and when you fill out the survey, your moral judgments will be more focused on the outcome of the action instead of the intention. Whereas normally, intention matters a huge amount to us, whether or not somebody meant to, crash the school bus or whatever. So our intuitions can be affected by whether or not we're in the presence of fart spray, whether or not we held a cup of coffee for 2 seconds, whether or not we are in the presence of freshly baked bread, or whether or not I'm pointing a magnet behind your right ear. So this is a lot of reasons to not put much stock in your moral intuitions, even though that's what most of us do, and I'm tempted to do that, my goodness. But I don't think we should, because of all those reasons. But now, getting back to the benefit of doing the science of morality, what happens if we make morality a science? How do we answer moral questions then, if we can't rely on our intuitions? We do science. We already know science works. Science gets us on the moon. Science cures diseases. Science gives us more new knowledge about the world that we live in each year than we got during the entire Christian Dark Ages. Science works really well, and if we're just doing science, well, then we can have evidence for moral facts, and we can come to agree on them, no matter what our intuitions are. I mean, think about it. Special relativity, for example. Special relativity is very counterintuitive, to me at least. Special relativity says that if me and my identical twin are on Earth, and I send my identical twin to Betelgeuse and back on a really fast rocket, when he comes back to Earth, he will be younger than I am. Now, my intuitions do not agree with that. My intuitions say, no, Einstein, you are wrong. But I actually accept special relativity because there's lots of really good evidence for it. And I think most of us in the room accept special relativity because there's really good evidence for it, even though our intuitions probably don't agree with it. And there are lots of things like that, where whatever our intuitions say, if what we're doing is science, we might be able to agree when the evidence points one way strongly or in one way or another, and we can set aside our evolution and evolved moral prejudices that we're using as our intuitions. So I think that's the main benefit if we decide to make morality a science instead of a game of conflicting intuitions, is we can come to actually know moral facts because of evidence instead of intuitions, and we can come to agree on moral facts. So, just to recap, you don't need God to have objective morality, and in fact, God-based morality is subjective because it's grounded in the attitudes of a person. That's what subjective morality means. The second is, I think we can make morality a science if we do what I talked about, and we look at all the moral theories that are out there, and we pick just the few that make only true claims about things that really exist in the world, and then we could go out and take surveys around the world and figure out which assumptions are most built into our moral discourse, and we could pick the theory among those true theories that captures the most of those assumptions. And that wouldn't be the one true theory of morality, because that's not how language works, but it might be the one most universal theory of morality. And then once we've got that, once we've got a set of definitions and a theory to work with, we can go out and measure what it is that's morally right or morally wrong according to that theory. And the main benefit of that is that we can finally come to discover and know moral facts and come to agree on them instead of endlessly fighting between our intuitions, our evolved moral prejudices. And that's the way forward, I think. It'll be really hard because we can't answer moral questions anymore just by closing our eyes and consulting our intuitions. We'll have to send out scientists to do work, and it'll be really difficult. But I think we need to do it if we want to come to know moral facts because of evidence and come to agreement on those moral facts, even if our intuitions disagree. So that's my proposal. It's not just my proposal. This is a fairly common view in metaethics. But I think this is what we need to do if we want to actually make progress in morality. So, thank you. Now, we wanted to make sure to have a long question and answer period because a lot of that I know is probably not familiar to most people, but different among us are going to have totally different familiarities with the subject matter. So, but before we do the question and answer, I just want to mention that if you are interested by these issues and you're interested about the possibility that morality could be a science instead of some kind of very vague philosophical thing where we bash our intuitions against each other, then I asked Leaders in Free Thought to have some books available in the back there. I haven't written any philosophical books yet, but the most relevant book is the recent bestseller by Sam Harris called The Moral Landscape: How Science Can Determine Moral Values. And so what he does in that book is he doesn't, like me, he's not presenting a particular theory of morality, but he's presenting a research program that we could do if we decided that we wanted to make morality a science. And he responds to a lot of the usual objections to the idea that morality could be a science. And in a way, it's kind of like a book by Stephen Hawking or Brian Greene on physics, where it's just this smorgasbord of all the latest cool stuff that's going on in physics, except with Sam Harris, it's kind of all the latest cool thought experiments and everything that are going on in moral philosophy. So it might be really interesting for you as well in that regard. So that's available in the back. If this subject matter is interesting to you, I can recommend that. But I think we're ready to kind of open it up for questions. We have one down here.
Where can I go to hear more of your stuff and learn more about this?
I have a website called commonsenseatheism.com. It's mostly focused on philosophy of religion and moral philosophy. And on there I have a podcast called Morality in the Real World, where a philosopher friend and I are developing this kind of approach and then getting more specific about specific moral claims and whether they're true or not. But it takes a long time to do that, and so each episode is about 10 minutes, and then we're probably going to do 100 episodes or something before we really solve any philosophical problems. But so if you want to check out more of this, commonsenseatheism.com. Also, if you want, you can click contact on there and say, hey, I was interested by this particular part, and I'll even be able to send you papers to read and stuff if you want to really dive deep into that. So yeah, commonsenseatheism.com. Other questions? Yeah.
You seem to have only two options here. Either morality is about intuitions, which you reject, or it's about intuitions, which you reject, or it's about scientific investigation. But what about the option of morality being about facts of reason, about rational thought, which a categorical imperative would be? Why reject those? We wouldn't expect to find such things scientifically because they're just not the kind of things that you empirically find. So why reject that?
Yeah. So the question is, I'm maybe given a false dichotomy. I said that we could do morality by consulting our intuitions, or we can do morality by science. But maybe there's a third method. We could do morality by reasoning through it. And there's a couple different ways you might do that. One way is you start with your intuitions and you reason from that. So you might start with the intuition that you just think pain is just bad, always, morally bad, always. And then from there, you might be persuaded by a series of logical arguments to be persuaded to think that if you hold that value already, if you're going to be consistent with that value that you already hold intuitively, then you shouldn't be eating factory farmed meat. And that would be reason, but it always goes back to an intuitive moral judgment. But what you asked about is about another option of reasoning towards morality, and that's what's called the categorical imperative. It's really hard for me to answer that. If there was such a thing as a categorical imperative, such that, one way to cash it out is to say that it would be somehow fundamentally irrational to do things that are immoral, or it would contradict human identity is another way to cash that out. I've looked at those, and I wish that I could make one of those theories work. I just can't, because it would make morality much easier, because we could solve moral problems from our armchairs, and we could think about it, and we wouldn't have to send scientists out in the world. So I am still exploring that, and would very much like it to turn out to be the case that that works. I just can't find out any way to make it work. Now, maybe somebody else will. Maybe somebody else already has. But you're right, I just kind of skipped over that whole option, and that's certainly a research program worth doing. There are some reasons why I'm not optimistic about that research program. But great question.